My hands trembled as I stared at the DNA test results on my kitchen table, the truth I'd suspected for years finally confirmed in cold, scientific data. The blood relation that linked me to my grandfather was undeniable, but what shocked me most was the genetic marker that proved how he had really died. My family had called me delusional, paranoid, a disgrace to the Mitchell name. This is the story of how I uncovered the murder they tried to hide. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The rain pounded against the windows of my small apartment as I spread out the documents I'd collected over the past 18 months. Police reports with convenient omissions. Medical examiner notes with unexplained discrepancies. Family photographs with telling details no one else had noticed. And now, the final piece. DNA evidence that would shatter the lies my family had constructed. I'm Emma Mitchell, 29 years old, a forensic accountant by profession and, apparently, the only person who cared enough about my grandfather to question the circumstances of his death. Growing up, I'd been the odd one out in the Mitchell family, too analytical, too persistent, too unwilling to accept the comfortable falsehoods that kept our family functioning. My grandfather Walter had been different. He saw my questions not as challenges, but as signs of intelligence. "That mind of yours will take you places," he'd tell me, his eyes crinkling at the corners with pride. Walter Mitchell had built Mitchell Pharmaceuticals from nothing, turning a small research lab into a billion-dollar company that developed life-saving medications. Unlike my father and his siblings, who saw the company as their personal ATM, Walter had a genuine passion for helping people. He lived modestly despite his wealth, driving the same car for 20 years and donating generously to medical research. When he died, suddenly 18 months ago, everyone called it a heart attack. Natural causes. Expected at his age. But I had seen him the day before, vibrant, clear-eyed, excited about a new research direction the company was taking. He had called me specifically to discuss something of great importance the following week. That meeting never happened. At the funeral, my questions about the lack of an autopsy were met with contempt. My father, James, put his arm around my shoulders, his fingers digging painfully into my arm as he whispered, "Stop making a scene. This isn't one of your little mysteries to solve." My Aunt Patricia, always ready with a cutting remark, suggested I was creating drama to compensate for my failed marriage. My Uncle Robert, the company's CFO, simply ignored me, too busy comforting his son Parker, who had mysteriously been named the new CEO, despite having no qualifications beyond being Walter's grandson. I might have let it go if I hadn't received an anonymous envelope a week after the funeral. Inside was a lab report with my grandfather's name on it, dated 3 days before his death. Several compounds were highlighted, substances that wouldn't normally be in the bloodstream of a health-conscious man in his 70s. The note attached simply read, "You were always his favorite. He would want you to know." That was the beginning of my investigation. I took a leave of absence from my job at a prestigious accounting firm, using my savings to finance what would become an all-consuming quest for truth. My first stop was the medical examiner's office, where I was told that due to the obvious nature of my grandfather's death, only a cursory examination had been performed. No toxicology screening, no detailed autopsy. The death certificate had been signed within hours. The police were equally unhelpful. "Family matters aren't our concern, Miss Mitchell," the detective told me, not even bothering to look at the lab report I'd brought. Later I would discover that my Uncle Robert played golf weekly with the police chief. Another dead end. I began to work methodically, using the skills I'd developed as a forensic accountant. I requested my grandfather's medical records, which showed him to be in excellent health for his age. I tracked down his personal physician, Dr. Levine, who had conveniently retired to Florida immediately after Walter's death. When I finally reached him by phone, his voice became guarded when I mentioned my grandfather. "I signed no death certificate," he said after a long pause. "I was informed of Walter's passing by your father. When I suggested an autopsy given his excellent health, I was told it had already been declined by the family." Before hanging up, he added, "Your grandfather expressed concerns to me during his last checkup about his medication. about changes he couldn't explain. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Those words sent me digging deeper. I used my connections to access prescription records, discovering that my grandfather had indeed been prescribed several medications in the months before his death, prescriptions that had not been written by Dr. Levine. The authorizing physician was Dr. Maxwell Reed, a name I didn't recognize but who, after some research, turned out to be my cousin Parker's former college roommate. Meanwhile, my family's hostility toward me intensified. My calls went unanswered. My emails were blocked. At my nephew's birthday party, the only family event I was still invited to, my Aunt Patricia loudly suggested I was having a mental breakdown and should consider getting professional help. My father pulled me aside and warned me that my unhealthy obsession was affecting the family business. "The board is concerned," he said. "Your wild accusations could tank our stock price." I hadn't made any public accusations. I hadn't spoken to anyone outside the family. The only way the board could know about my concerns was if my family had told them. They were watching me, worried about what I might discover. The tipping point came 3 months into my investigation. I returned home one evening to find my apartment had been broken into. Nothing valuable was taken. Not my laptop, not my television, not the cash I kept in my desk drawer. But my files on grandfather's death were scattered across the floor, and the original lab report was missing. The message was clear: stop looking. Instead, I became more careful. I created digital backups of everything, storing them on encrypted drives and secure cloud services. I started recording all my phone calls and meetings. I varied my routines, changed coffee shops frequently, paid for everything in cash. Paranoid? Perhaps. But someone had broken into my home, and I wasn't taking chances. My breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Maria Delgado had been my grandfather's housekeeper for over 20 years. She had retired shortly after his death, returning to her hometown in New Mexico. I tracked her down through social media and flew out to meet her, presenting myself as a relative wanting to share memories of Walter. Maria welcomed me into her modest home, serving homemade empanadas and coffee. We talked about my grandfather for hours, looking through photographs she had saved. As the evening wore on, her smile faded. "Something was wrong those last weeks," she confided, lowering her voice despite us being alone. Mr. Walter was not himself. Confused sometimes. Forgetting things. He would get so frustrated. "Did he see a doctor?" I asked. "Your father and uncle started coming by every day. They brought medicine. Said the doctor had prescribed it." Maria's eyes narrowed. But Mr. Walter didn't trust it. "One night I found him in the kitchen, opening the capsules, examining what was inside. He asked me to keep one for him, somewhere safe." From a small box on her mantel, Maria retrieved a clear plastic bag containing a single white capsule. "He said if anything happened to him, I should give this to you." My hands shook as I accepted it. "Did he say why me?" "He said you were the only one who would look for the truth. The only one brave enough to stand against the family." I had the capsule analyzed by an independent laboratory, a former colleague who owed me a favor and didn't ask questions. The results confirmed my worst suspicions. The capsule contained a combination of compounds that, when taken regularly, would mimic the symptoms of cognitive decline while gradually weakening the heart. Individually, none of the substances would raise red flags in a standard toxicology screen. Together, administered over time, they were deadly. But proving my family's involvement would require more than a suspicious pill. I needed access to company records, financial transactions, communication between board members. As a forensic accountant, I knew that money always leaves a trail. If my grandfather was murdered for control of Mitchell Pharmaceuticals, there would be evidence in the numbers. Getting that evidence meant infiltrating the company. Direct approaches were out of the question. My family had made sure I was persona non grata at corporate headquarters. Instead, I created a false identity, complete with references and a manufactured work history. Disguising my appearance with a new hairstyle, colored contacts, and subtle makeup techniques I learned from online tutorials, I applied for a position in the accounting department through a temporary staffing agency. 2 agonizing weeks later, I was hired as Olivia Jenkins, a data entry specialist assigned to accounts payable. The position was entry-level and mind-numbingly dull, but it gave me access to the company's financial systems. Each night, after my colleagues had left, I would stay late, ostensibly to catch up on work, while methodically exploring restricted areas of the database. What I discovered was a complex web of financial manipulation. In the months leading up to my grandfather's death, millions of dollars had been diverted from research and development into a series of shell companies. These companies, upon further investigation, were registered to addresses associated with my father, uncle, and cousin. The money trail revealed a systematic looting of the company's most valuable assets, its intellectual property. Patents for groundbreaking medications had been transferred to these shell companies for nominal sums, then licensed back to Mitchell Pharmaceuticals at exorbitant rates. The scheme was bleeding the company dry while enriching my family personally. But my grandfather, still in control of the board, would never have approved such transactions. His death had not just been convenient, it had been necessary for their plan to succeed. I was carefully documenting these findings when I made a critical mistake. Focused on downloading financial records to my encrypted drive, I failed to notice the security guard making his rounds earlier than usual. He reported seeing Olivia, accessing restricted files, and by morning, IT had traced my activities. I arrived at work to find security waiting for me. My disguise didn't fool my cousin Parker, who was called down to deal with the corporate spy. His face when he recognized me was a mixture of shock and rage. "You just can't leave well enough alone, can you?" he hissed as security escorted me from the building. "This is the last time you interfere with my company." "It was never your company," I replied, "and I know what you did to grandfather." His laugh was cold. "Prove it," he challenged. "No one will believe you." The disturbed granddaughter, obsessed with conspiracy theories, unable to accept a natural death. We've already established that narrative quite effectively. He was right. I had the financial evidence of their fraud, but nothing concrete linking them to my grandfather's death except a single pill from a housekeeper and circumstantial timing. I needed irrefutable proof. The answer came to me during a sleepless night reviewing everything I had learned. My grandfather had been meticulous about his health, undergoing comprehensive checkups every 6 months. These would have included blood tests. If I could access samples from before the suspicious medications began and compare them to post-mortem samples, I might find evidence of the compounds that killed him. The hospital where my grandfather had been taken after his, heart attack, kept blood samples for 1 year before disposing of them. I was cutting it close. Nearly 11 months had passed since his death. Dr. Levine's office would have records of previous tests, but accessing either would require resources and connections I didn't have, unless I didn't try to access them at all. Instead, I approached the problem from a different angle. Rather than trying to prove my grandfather had been poisoned, what if I could prove my own connection to him and use that connection to force a proper investigation? DNA doesn't lie, and as his granddaughter, I shared unique genetic markers with him. But more importantly, a comprehensive DNA test might reveal the presence of unusual compounds that had altered his genetic material, compounds that would still be present in preserved samples. I submitted my own DNA for testing, then used my savings to hire a private investigator to obtain a sample of my grandfather's preserved blood from the hospital. The PI, a former police detective named Marcus Winters, didn't ask many questions after I showed him the financial evidence I'd gathered. "I don't like rich folks who think they're above the law," was all he said. While waiting for the results, I received an unexpected visitor. My younger sister, Natalie, whom I hadn't spoken to in months, showed up at my apartment one rainy evening. Unlike the rest of the family, Natalie had always been conflicted about their treatment of me. She wasn't involved in the business, pursuing a career in art instead, which had given her some distance from the family's machinations. "They're saying terrible things about you," she said, perching uncomfortably on my couch. "Dad told everyone you tried to steal company secrets. that you might be arrested." "And you believed him?" I asked, too tired for anger. "I don't know what to believe anymore." She looked around at the investigation materials covering my walls. "This all seems so extreme." "Grandpa had a heart attack, Emma. It happens." I showed her what I had found: the financial records, the transferred patents, the shell companies. Her eyes widened as she realized the scale of the fraud. "But murder? That's a huge leap from financial crimes." "Is it?" I pushed the toxicology report from the pill across the table. This was in the medication they were giving him. A perfectly calibrated combination to weaken his heart while making him appear mentally incompetent, giving them justification to take control of his voting shares. Natalie left that night visibly shaken, promising nothing but clearly disturbed by what I had shown her. I didn't expect her support. Family loyalty ran too deep, but I hoped I had planted a seed of doubt. 3 days later, the DNA test results arrived. They confirmed what I already knew, that I was indeed Walter Mitchell's granddaughter, but they revealed something else, something I hadn't anticipated. The test had detected unusual genetic markers in both samples, consistent with prolonged exposure to specific synthetic compounds. Compounds that matched those found in the suspicious pill. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. My grandfather had been slowly poisoned over months, his cognitive abilities undermined, his heart weakened, until a final, fatal dose triggered what appeared to be a natural heart attack. And I now had scientific data linking those compounds to him, data that couldn't be dismissed as the delusions of a disturbed mind. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the results, planning my next move. I could take this to the police, but without knowing who else in the department might be connected to my family, I risked the evidence being buried again. I could approach the board of directors directly, but they had been complicit or at least willfully blind to the financial fraud. Why would they act differently about murder? No, I needed to be smarter, more strategic. I needed to use my family's greatest weakness against them, their obsession with public image and company valuation. A scandal would devastate stock prices. An investigation would freeze assets and potentially void fraudulent patent transfers. The threat of exposure might force a confession, or at least a negotiation. As I considered my options, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. About Grandpa. About what they did. I want to help." It was signed simply N. Natalie had made her choice, and with that, I finally had an ally inside the family. The game was about to change. My hands steadied as I gathered the DNA results. The truth about my grandfather's murder was no longer just a theory. It was scientifically verifiable fact, and I was done being called a liar. I met Natalie at a coffee shop 20 miles outside the city, far from any location our family might frequent. She arrived wearing oversized sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled low, looking over her shoulder as she slid into the booth across from me. Her hands trembled as she removed her sunglasses, revealing red-rimmed eyes. "I couldn't sleep after what you showed me," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I started looking through Dad's home office while he was at work. I found these." She slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside were handwritten notes in my grandfather's distinctive script, dated in the weeks before his death. They detailed his growing suspicions about the medications he was being given, and his concerns about the company's financial dealings. The final entry, dated the day before he died, was chilling. "Meeting with Emma tomorrow. She'll understand what needs to be done. Can't trust the others anymore." My vision blurred with tears. He had known. He had tried to reach out to me, and they had silenced him before he could. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. "There's more," Natalie said, her voice strengthening with resolve. "Parker isn't just running the company, he's dismantling it. The research division that was working on Grandpa's passion project, the affordable Alzheimer's treatment, it's being gutted. The patents are being sold to Global Farm for a fraction of their worth." "Let me guess," I said bitterly. "Parker gets a personal kickback on the deal." Natalie nodded. $20 million according to the contract I found. Dad and Uncle Robert each get 15. The pieces were falling into place. My grandfather had devoted the last years of his life to developing an affordable treatment for Alzheimer's, driven by our grandmother's battle with the disease. The treatment showed extraordinary promise in early trials, potentially worth billions, but only if kept affordable as Walter had intended. By selling the patents to a notorious price gouger like Global Farm, my family was not only betraying his legacy, but ensuring the medication would be accessible only to the wealthy. The deal finalizes at the shareholders' meeting next Friday, Natalie continued. After that, there's no stopping it. Unless we expose them first, I said, spreading out the DNA test results. I explained what the tests had revealed, the genetic markers showing prolonged exposure to the same compounds found in the suspicious pill. This proves Grandpa was being poisoned, Natalie. It's scientific evidence they can't dismiss. She studied the results, her artist's eye noting details I had missed. These compounds, they're similar to experimental drugs Mitchell Pharmaceuticals was developing 5 years ago. I remember because Grandpa was so excited about their potential for treating degenerative diseases. So they used the company's own research to kill him, I said, the irony bitter on my tongue. They turned his life's work into a murder weapon. We spent the next 3 hours developing a strategy. Direct confrontation had failed me before. This time, we needed to be more sophisticated. The shareholders' meeting presented a perfect opportunity. All the key players would be present, along with the board of directors, major investors, and the press. But we need more than just the DNA results and financial records, Natalie pointed out. We need someone on the inside to corroborate, someone who can't be dismissed as a disgruntled family member. I thought of Marcus Winters, the PI who had helped me obtain my grandfather's blood sample. I might know someone who can help us find that person. Winters didn't hesitate when I called him. Been waiting to hear from you, he said gruffly. Found something interesting while I was at the hospital. Your grandfather's attending physician the night he died? Dr. Sandra Chen. She filed an unusual supplemental report questioning the heart attack diagnosis. It was buried in the system, never followed up on. Can you find her? I asked. Already did. She's working at City General now. Said she'd be willing to talk to you. Dr. Chen was a petite woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She remembered my grandfather clearly. Not surprising, given that he had been one of the city's most prominent citizens. His symptoms didn't align with a typical myocardial infarction, she explained in her office after hours. There were neurological anomalies I couldn't explain. I requested additional tests, but your father intervened. Said the family didn't want an autopsy, wanted to respect Mr. Mitchell's wishes for minimal medical intervention. That wasn't my grandfather, I said firmly. He believed in science above all. He would have wanted every test possible. Dr. Chen nodded. I had that impression as well, which is why I filed the supplemental report. But by then, the death certificate had been signed, and the body was released for cremation. Cremation? I repeated, startled. My grandfather wanted to be buried next to my grandmother. Everyone in the family knew that. The cremation order came from your father directly, Dr. Chen said. He had the necessary paperwork. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. They had destroyed the evidence, my grandfather's body, as quickly as possible. Would you be willing to testify about your concerns? I asked. About the inconsistencies you observed? Dr. Chen hesitated, then squared her shoulders. Medical ethics require me to report suspected foul play. If you have evidence that Mr. Mitchell was poisoned, I have a professional obligation to support that investigation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. With Dr. Chen on board, we had medical testimony to support the DNA evidence. But we still needed to connect the poisoning directly to my family members. For that, we needed someone who had witnessed them administering the medication. Maria might know someone, I suggested to Natalie. She mentioned other household staff who were present during those final weeks. A call to New Mexico revealed that my grandfather's former gardener, Thomas Reyes, still lived in the city and had been troubled by what he had observed in the weeks before Walter's death. I was trimming the hedges outside his study, Thomas told us when we met him at his modest home. The window was open, and I heard arguing. Your father and uncle were insisting Mr. Mitchell take some medication. He was refusing, saying it made him confused. Did you see them give him the medication? Natalie asked. Thomas nodded slowly. The next day, I was bringing in firewood. Mr. Mitchell was in his chair, looking not right. Your cousin Parker was there, holding a glass of water, watching Mr. Mitchell swallow some pills. He saw me and shut the door quickly. Thomas had taken a phone video of the interaction through the window, sensing something was wrong. The footage was grainy but clearly showed Parker standing over our grandfather, watching intently as he swallowed something. We were building a compelling case. Medical testimony, DNA evidence, financial motive, eyewitness accounts, and now video evidence of my family members administering suspicious medication. But we still needed to connect those pills definitively to the compounds found in my grandfather's system. The answer came from an unexpected source. 2 days before the shareholders' meeting, Natalie called me in a panic. "Parker found out I've been helping you," she said, her voice tight with fear. "He confronted me at the house, threatened me, said I'd regret betraying the family." "Are you safe?" I asked immediately. "I'm at a friend's place." "But, Emma, before I left I took something from Parker's home office. I think it might be important." She had found a locked metal box hidden in Parker's desk drawer. Using the skills I'd reluctantly taught her when we were teenagers breaking into our parents' liquor cabinet, she had picked the lock. Inside were vials of white powder and a notebook containing formulations, the same compounds identified in the DNA test. "This is it," I breathed, examining the vials carefully through latex gloves. "This is what they used to kill Grandpa." The final piece fell into place the next morning when Marcus Winters called with news. I tracked down Dr. Maxwell Reed, the physician who prescribed those suspicious medications. He's agreed to talk in exchange for immunity. Says your cousin has been blackmailing him for years over an incident from their college days. Dr. Reed's confession was damning. He had provided the prescriptions under duress, knowing they were inappropriate but fearing the consequences of refusing. More critically, he had formulated the specific compound used to poison my grandfather, under Parker's direction. Parker studied biochemistry before dropping out of medical school. Dr. Reed explained nervously. He understood exactly what these compounds would do over time, how they would appear natural when combined with Walter's age and medical history. With all the evidence assembled, we finalized our plan for the shareholders' meeting. Natalie would attend as a family member, securing me access as her financial advisor. Marcus Winters would be stationed outside with police officers he trusted, former colleagues unconnected to my uncle's influence. Dr. Chen and Dr. Reed would arrive separately, ready to provide expert testimony if needed. The night before the meeting, I couldn't sleep. I stood at my apartment window, watching the city lights, thinking about my grandfather. He had built his company on principles of integrity and public service. He had trusted his family to carry on that legacy. Instead, they had betrayed him in the most fundamental way possible, taking his life to steal his life's work. "I'll make it right, Grandpa," I whispered to the darkness. "I promise." The Mitchell Pharmaceuticals headquarters gleamed in the morning sunlight, a towering glass structure that reflected my grandfather's belief in transparency. Inside, however, darkness had taken root. As Natalie and I passed through security, I felt the weight of what we were about to do. We weren't just seeking justice for Walter Mitchell. We were fighting for the soul of his company. The boardroom was already filling with shareholders, board members, and executives when we arrived. My father's face darkened when he saw me enter with Natalie. He moved quickly to intercept us, gripping my arm painfully. "You have no place here," he hissed. "Security will remove you." "I'm here as Natalie's advisor," I replied calmly, showing the visitor's badge. "Perfectly legitimate." Parker approached, his handsome face arranged in a mask of concern. "Emma, this obsession of yours has gone too far. The family is worried about your mental health." "Are they worried?" I asked, meeting his gaze steadily. "Or are they afraid?" Before he could respond, the meeting was called to order. The chairman, a longtime friend of my grandfather's named Harold Winters, opened with a moment of silence for Walter Mitchell. The hypocrisy made my stomach turn. Then came the business agenda, moving efficiently toward the main item, the sale of the Alzheimer's treatment patents to Global Farm. "Before we vote on this matter," the chairman announced, "the floor is open for questions." This was our moment. Natalie stood, her voice surprisingly steady. "I'd like to address the board regarding this sale." All eyes turned to her. As the youngest Mitchell, Natalie rarely spoke at business functions. Her sudden assertiveness caused a ripple of surprise through the room. My grandfather dedicated the final years of his life to developing an affordable treatment for Alzheimer's disease. She began. He was explicit about his intentions. This medication was to be accessible to all patients, regardless of financial status. The proposed sale to Global Farm directly contradicts his wishes. My Uncle Robert stood, his voice condescending. While we appreciate your concern, Natalie, business decisions must be based on financial realities, not sentimentality. This sale represents the best interests of the company and its shareholders. Does it? I asked, rising to stand beside my sister. Or does it represent the best interests of the current leadership? A murmur ran through the assembled shareholders. My father stepped forward, face flushed with anger. This is not the appropriate forum for family disagreements. Perhaps we should discuss why Walter Mitchell really died, I interrupted, my voice carrying across the now silent room. Perhaps we should examine the evidence that he was systematically poisoned to prevent him from stopping exactly this type of corporate betrayal. Quote. The shocked silence that followed was broken by Parker's forced laugh. This is exactly what we've been concerned about. My cousin has been spinning conspiracy theories since our grandfather's death. It's unfortunate and concerning, but not something the shareholders need to address. It's not a theory, I replied, opening my briefcase. It's evidence. One by one, I presented the documents we had gathered. The DNA test results showing the presence of toxic compounds. The financial records revealing the fraud. My grandfather's notes expressing his suspicions. Thomas Reyes. Videos showing Parker administering medication. Dr. Chen's medical report questioning the heart attack diagnosis. And finally, Dr. Reed himself entered the boardroom, escorted by Marcus Winters. The color drained from Parker's face as his former friend detailed how he had been coerced into providing the lethal formulation. This is absurd, my father sputtered, but his protest lacked conviction as the evidence mounted. Board members exchanged alarmed glances. Shareholders whispered among themselves. The Global Farm representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Walter Mitchell was murdered, I concluded, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me. Murdered by his own family to gain control of his company and betray everything he built it for. The police are here now, with warrants for the arrests of James Mitchell, Robert Mitchell, and Parker Mitchell on charges of conspiracy, fraud, and first-degree murder. As if on cue, officers entered the boardroom, led by a detective who introduced himself as Lieutenant Rivera. We have some questions for certain members of the Mitchell family, he announced grimly. What followed was chaos. My father and uncle protesting loudly, Parker attempting to flee only to be blocked by security, shareholders demanding answers from the board. Through it all, Natalie and I stood firm, watching as the men who had called me a liar, who had dismissed my concerns as delusions, who had betrayed and murdered our grandfather, were led away in handcuffs. In the aftermath, the board called an emergency session. The Global Farm deal was unanimously rejected. Harold Winters, visibly shaken by the revelations, proposed that Natalie and I be appointed as interim co-directors of the Alzheimer's Research Division, to ensure our grandfather's vision was preserved. Outside the building, reporters had gathered, alerted by the unusual police presence at a shareholders' meeting. Natalie squeezed my hand as cameras flashed and questions were shouted. You don't have to speak to them, she whispered. But I did. My grandfather's legacy deserved to be defended publicly, his murder acknowledged, his vision for the company restored. I stepped forward, Natalie beside me, and faced the press. Today, Mitchell Pharmaceuticals recommits itself to the principles of its founder. I began. To scientific integrity, to accessibility of life-saving medications, to putting patients before profits, and to justice, even when that justice must come at great personal cost. In the weeks that followed, the evidence we had gathered proved irrefutable. My father, uncle, and cousin were charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy, and massive financial fraud. The trial would be long and painful, exposing family secrets and corporate corruption in equal measure. But the truth, finally, would be known. Mitchell Pharmaceuticals underwent a comprehensive restructuring. The board, many of whom had turned a blind eye to the corruption, resigned in disgrace. New leadership was established, with Natalie and me serving as special advisors to ensure our grandfather's ethical standards were upheld. The Alzheimer's treatment entered its final testing phase, showing even more promise than initially projected. True to Walter's vision, a pricing structure was established that would ensure accessibility across economic boundaries, potentially helping millions of patients worldwide. 1 year to the day after the shareholders' meeting, I stood at my grandfather's newly established gravesite. We had fought a legal battle to have his remains exhumed from the crematorium that had never actually processed them, another lie in the web of deception, and properly buried beside my grandmother. The headstone bore his favorite quote, "Science without compassion is merely technology." Natalie placed flowers on the grave, her hand resting briefly on the cool marble. "He would be proud of you," she said softly. "You never stopped fighting for the truth." "For him," I replied. "For what he built. For what he believed in." As we walked back to the car, my phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Chen. The Alzheimer's treatment had received final approval. Production would begin immediately. Thousands of patients who had been waiting, who had been told the treatment would be too expensive or too limited, would now have access to it. My grandfather's final gift to the world would reach those who needed it most. The family that had called me a liar now faced decades in prison. The DNA evidence that had initially connected me to my grandfather had ultimately revealed the truth of his murder, proving that science, the discipline he had dedicated his life to, would be his final vindication. Some might call it justice. I called it his legacy, preserved. And as I drove away from the cemetery, I felt his presence beside me, his hand on my shoulder, his voice in my ear. "That mind of yours will take you places." It had taken me exactly where I needed to be, to the truth no matter how painful, and to the fulfillment of a promise to the man who had always believed in me. The morning of the trial dawned clear and cold, the kind of crystalline winter day that makes every detail stand out in sharp relief. I stood before the mirror in my apartment, adjusting the collar of my charcoal suit and steeling myself for what was to come. Today, my father, uncle, and cousin would face a jury for the first time, charged with the premeditated murder of Walter Mitchell. "You don't have to be there every day," Natalie had told me the night before, concern etched across her face. "The prosecutors have everything they need. Our testimony is scheduled. You could just attend the key moments." But I knew better. This wasn't just about securing a conviction, it was about bearing witness. About looking the men who had betrayed my grandfather in the eye as their crimes were laid bare before the world. About honoring the trust Walter had placed in me when he'd tried to reach out before they silenced him forever. "I'll be there," I had replied simply. Every minute. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters when I arrived. Mitchell Pharmaceuticals had been a cornerstone of the community for decades, and the murder of its beloved founder by his own family members had become national news. Cameras flashed as I made my way through the throng, reporters shouting questions I had no intention of answering. This wasn't a media spectacle for me. It was the culmination of a promise. Inside, the courtroom was already filling with spectators, legal teams, and family members from both sides. My Aunt Elaine, Robert's wife, sat rigidly in the front row, her face a mask of dignified suffering. Beside her was her daughter Melissa, who had flown in from Europe where she'd been living since before my grandfather's death. She caught my eye briefly, her expression unreadable. Natalie arrived moments later, sliding into the seat beside me. "Ready?" she whispered, squeezing my hand. "As I'll ever be," I replied. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." The bailiff called the court to order, and a hush fell over the room as my father, uncle, and cousin were led in. They wore expensive suits instead of prison jumpsuits, a privilege of their substantial bail, but the electronic monitoring anklets visible beneath their pant legs told the true story. Their eyes swept the courtroom, lingering momentarily on Natalie and me. My father's gaze was cold with contempt. Parker looked away quickly, unable to maintain eye contact. Only my Uncle Robert had the decency to look ashamed. The prosecution's opening statement was devastating in its methodical presentation of the facts. The financial motive: billions in potential profits from the Alzheimer's treatment. The carefully orchestrated poisoning regimen designed to mimic natural cognitive decline and heart failure. The systematic efforts to conceal evidence, from blocking an autopsy to falsifying cremation orders. Walter Mitchell was murdered twice, the prosecutor concluded. First, when the defendants poisoned his body, and again when they attempted to poison his legacy by betraying everything he built and believed in. The defense strategy quickly became clear: deny the murder while admitting to the financial improprieties. Their theory was that my grandfather had indeed died of natural causes, and my family had simply taken advantage of the situation to enrich themselves. Unethical, perhaps, but not murderous. The prosecution has built a circumstantial case based on conjecture and the testimony of interested parties, the defense attorney argued. The scientific evidence they present is inconclusive at best, and the financial decisions, while perhaps questionable, were made in good faith to secure the company's future. Day after day, I sat through testimony that ranged from highly technical explanations of the toxic compounds found in my grandfather's system to emotional accounts from company employees who had witnessed his declining health and growing suspicion in those final weeks. Dr. Chen provided crucial medical testimony about the inconsistencies in the heart attack diagnosis. Dr. Reed detailed how he had been coerced into providing the lethal formulation, his voice breaking as he described the specific effects the compounds would have had on my grandfather's neurological function and cardiac health. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. On the fourth day, Maria Delgado took the stand. Now in her 70s, she carried herself with quiet dignity as she recounted her 2 decades of service to my grandfather. "He was not just my employer," she said in her soft accent. "He was a good man who treated everyone with respect. In those last weeks, he was not himself. He would forget things, become confused. But he had moments of clarity when he was very afraid." "Afraid of what, Ms. Delgado?" the prosecutor asked. "Of his family," she said simply. "Of what they were doing to him. He told me, Maria, they think I don't see, but I do." The defense attorney tried to undermine her testimony during cross-examination, suggesting that as an elderly woman herself, perhaps she had misremembered or misinterpreted events. Maria's spine straightened visibly. "Young man," she said, fixing him with a steady gaze, "I have cleaned houses for 50 years. You learn to see everything when people think you see nothing. Mr. Walter was being poisoned by his family, and he knew it." The most difficult testimony for me came from Thomas Reyes, who presented his video evidence showing Parker administering medication to my grandfather. The courtroom fell silent as the grainy footage played, showing my once vibrant grandfather slumped in his chair, looking confused and distressed as he swallowed pills under Parker's watchful eye. The timestamp confirmed it was less than 24 hours before his death. Then came the financial experts, who methodically detailed the massive fraud scheme my family had perpetrated. They explained how patents had been undervalued, assets hidden, and research funds diverted. The picture that emerged was one of breathtaking greed, a willingness to sacrifice not just my grandfather's life, but potentially millions of Alzheimer's patients who would have benefited from affordable treatment. Throughout it all, I maintained my composure, taking detailed notes and conferring quietly with the prosecutors when necessary. But inside, each revelation was a fresh wound. Each piece of evidence a reminder of the betrayal my grandfather had faced in his final days, not from competitors or strangers, but from the sons he had raised and the grandson he had loved. On the 10th day of the trial, it was my turn to testify. As I walked to the witness stand, I felt the weight of every eye in the courtroom, my father's glare, Natalie's encouraging nod, the jury's careful assessment. I swore to tell the truth, my voice steady, despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me. For 3 hours, I narrated my journey to uncover the truth, from my initial suspicions about my grandfather's sudden death to the methodical gathering of evidence that had led to this courtroom. I explained the DNA test results in layman's terms, detailing how the genetic markers revealed prolonged exposure to synthetic compounds designed to mimic neurological disease and weaken cardiac function. "And why did you pursue this investigation?" the prosecutor asked. "Even when your family called you delusional, even when they threatened you, why continue?" I looked directly at my father as I answered. "Because my grandfather taught me that truth matters, that integrity isn't negotiable, that standing up for what's right is worth any personal cost." My voice caught slightly. "And because he would have done the same for me." The defense attorney approached with practiced sympathy. "Ms. Mitchell, isn't it possible that your investigation was driven by resentment? By anger at being excluded from company leadership? By a desire to damage the family that you felt had wronged you?" "If I wanted revenge," I replied calmly, "I could have gone public with the financial fraud immediately. That alone would have destroyed the company's stock value and my family's reputation. But this was never about revenge. It was about justice for a man who deserved better than to be murdered by his own family." When I stepped down from the witness stand, I felt a curious lightness. For 18 months, I had carried the burden of knowing what had happened to my grandfather, while being dismissed as paranoid and vindictive. Now, the truth was in the hands of the justice system. Whatever the outcome, I had fulfilled my promise to my grandfather. I had found the truth and brought it to light. The defense's case was predictably focused on creating reasonable doubt. They presented medical experts who suggested that the compounds found in my grandfather's system could have been the result of legitimate medications. They brought character witnesses who testified to my father, uncle, and cousin's community standing and business acumen. They even attempted to paint me as emotionally unstable, driven by a lifelong sense of exclusion from the family business. But the evidence was too substantial, the motive too clear, the pattern of deception too well established. After 3 weeks of testimony, the case went to the jury. They deliberated for just 6 hours before returning their verdict. The courtroom fell silent as the judge asked the defendants to rise. My father stood ramrod straight, his expression defiant. My uncle Robert seemed to have aged a decade during the trial, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Parker stared at the floor, unable to face what was coming. "On the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Walter Mitchell, how do you find?" "Guilty on all counts," the jury foreman announced. The courtroom erupted in murmurs as the judge called for order. Additional guilty verdicts followed for conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice. My father's face drained of color. Parker swayed slightly, steadied by his attorney. Only my uncle seemed to accept the verdict with a kind of resigned acknowledgement, nodding slightly, as if confirming what he had always known would be the outcome. As they were led away in handcuffs, my father turned to look at me one last time. In his eyes, I saw not remorse but a cold fury, blame for his downfall placed squarely on my shoulders rather than his own actions. I met his gaze steadily, neither triumphant nor apologetic. The truth had prevailed. That was all that mattered. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements. Natalie and I had agreed to speak briefly, not to gloat over the verdict but to refocus attention on what truly mattered: my grandfather's legacy and the future of Mitchell Pharmaceuticals. "Justice has been served today," I told the assembled press. But this case was never just about holding individuals accountable for a terrible crime. It was about protecting the vision and values that Walter Mitchell built his company upon. Innovation driven by compassion, success measured by lives improved, not just profits generated. "Mitchell Pharmaceuticals will continue its mission," Natalie added. "The Alzheimer's treatment that our grandfather worked so hard to develop is now in production, with a pricing structure that ensures accessibility for patients regardless of economic status. That is his true legacy, and it's one we are committed to honoring." As we walked away from the courthouse, a weight lifted from my shoulders. The long fight for justice had taken its toll. Emotionally, physically, financially. There had been moments of doubt, of fear, of overwhelming grief. But standing up for the truth had been worth every sacrifice. In the months that followed, Mitchell Pharmaceuticals underwent a profound transformation. With my father, uncle, and cousin imprisoned, ownership of their shares reverted to the company under the terms of corporate bylaws regarding criminal conduct. The board was restructured, with new members selected for their commitment to ethical business practices as well as their expertise. Natalie and I were offered leadership positions. She as creative director, overseeing the company's public health initiatives, and I, as chief ethics officer, responsible for ensuring transparency and integrity in all business operations. Together, we worked to rebuild not just the company's reputation, but its soul, returning to the principles that had guided our grandfather throughout his career. The Alzheimer's treatment, now named Mitchell's Promise in honor of its creator, proved even more effective than initial trials had suggested. Within a year of its release, over 200,000 patients were receiving the medication at affordable rates. Their cognitive decline slowed or even halted in some cases. Letters poured in from families around the world, sharing stories of parents who recognized their children again, of spouses who could once more recall their wedding days, of lives reclaimed from the fog of dementia. On the anniversary of the verdict, I visited my grandfather's grave alone. The simple headstone bore only his name, dates, and the words, "Truth Seeker, Healer, Beloved." I placed a single white rose beside it and sat on the small bench nearby. "We did it, Grandpa," I said softly to the quiet air. "Your treatment is helping thousands of people. The company is stronger than ever, guided by your values. And the truth about what happened to you is known." I paused, feeling the familiar ache of loss. I wish you could see it. I wish you could know that in the end, truth won. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the oak tree sheltering his grave, and for just a moment I felt his presence, that unique combination of scientific precision and boundless compassion that had defined him. In that moment I knew he did see it. He did know. As I walked back to my car, my phone buzzed with a message from Natalie. The FDA had just approved Mitchell Pharmaceuticals' new cancer treatment for clinical trials. Another potentially life-saving medication, developed using the ethical research protocols our grandfather had established, would soon be helping patients. Life moves forward. Truth prevails. Legacy endures. 6 months later, I stood before a graduating class of science and medical students at the university my grandfather had attended 60 years earlier. The Walter Mitchell Scholarship for Ethical Innovation, established by Natalie and me using our inheritance, had funded 20 of the students receiving their diplomas today. "You are entering a world that often values expediency over integrity," I told them. "A world where the pressure to succeed can sometimes overshadow the responsibility to do what's right." My grandfather faced those same pressures and chose a different path, one guided by the belief that true success is measured not by wealth accumulated, but by lives improved. I shared with them the story of Mitchell's Promise, how a treatment that could have been priced for maximum profit was instead made accessible to all who needed it. How that decision, far from damaging the company, had strengthened it, attracting ethical investors, dedicated researchers, and a customer base built on trust rather than necessity. The easiest path is rarely the right one, I concluded. Standing up for truth, whether in science, in business, or in personal relationships, often comes at a cost. But as my grandfather's life and death taught me, integrity is never wasted. Truth, once revealed, has a power that no deception can ultimately overcome. The students' applause was thunderous, but what moved me most were the nods of understanding, the determined expressions that told me these future scientists, doctors, and researchers were taking the message to heart. They would face their own ethical crossroads, their own moments of having to choose between expediency and integrity. And perhaps, remembering this story, some would choose the harder, truer path. Later that evening, at a small reception for the scholarship recipients, a young woman approached me. "Ms. Mitchell," she said hesitantly, "I wanted to thank you personally. My grandmother is one of the patients receiving Mitchell's Promise. She was diagnosed with Alzheimer's 3 years ago, and we were losing her day by day. Since starting the treatment, she's come back to us in ways we never thought possible." She showed me a photo on her phone, an elderly woman surrounded by family, her eyes clear and focused, her smile recognizable to anyone who has seen awareness return after the confusion of dementia. "This was last Christmas," the student continued. "She remembered everyone's names. She told stories from when my mom was little. It was like having her back." "That's exactly what my grandfather wanted," I said, blinking back tears. "To give families more time together, to preserve memories and connections, to ease suffering." "He would be proud of what you've done," she said earnestly. "Not just the medication, but the way you fought for the truth. My grandmother followed your story on the news. She calls you, that brave girl who didn't give up. As I drove home that night, those words echoed in my mind. That brave girl who didn't give up. Not a forensic accountant, not a company executive, not even a granddaughter seeking justice. Just someone who refused to accept comfortable lies when uncomfortable truths needed to be faced. In the end, that's what my grandfather's legacy truly was. Not just the medications he developed or the company he built, but the example he set of unwavering commitment to truth and integrity. When my family called me a liar for questioning my grandfather's death, they never imagined that science, his life's passion, would provide the irrefutable evidence of their guilt. The DNA test that proved my connection to him also revealed the truth of his murder, a poetic justice that I think would have appealed to his scientific mind. The path to that truth had been longer and more difficult than I could have imagined when I first received that anonymous lab report. There had been moments of doubt, of fear, of crushing loneliness. But with each step forward, each piece of evidence uncovered, each ally found, the path had become clearer. Not easier, but clearer. And in that clarity, I had found not just justice for my grandfather, but purpose for myself. The company was thriving under ethical leadership. The medications he had developed were reaching those who needed them most. The truth of his life and death was known and honored. Some nights, I still dreamed of him, not as he was in those final, confused days, but as the vibrant, curious man who had encouraged my questions when everyone else had dismissed them, who had seen potential in me that my own father had missed, who had trusted that if anyone would seek the truth, it would be me. That mind of yours will take you places, he had told me once. He couldn't have known then where it would lead, to uncovering his murder, to bringing his killers to justice, to preserving his legacy of healing and hope. But I like to think he would be satisfied with the journey, and with the destination. Truth matters. Integrity matters. Standing up for what's right matters. Even when, perhaps especially when, it costs you something. That was the lesson my grandfather lived and died by, and the one I had promised myself I would never forget. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.